We stood together waiting for the next bus. It, too, was empty. And this was the most heavily traveled line in the whole city. Bus after empty bus paused at the stop and moved on. We were so excited we could hardly speak coherently. Finally, Martin said, "I'm going to take the car and see what's happening in other places." He picked up Ralph Abernathy and they cruised together around the city. Martin told me about it when he got home. Everywhere it was the same. A few white people and maybe one or two blacks in otherwise empty buses. Martin and Ralph saw extraordinary sights. The sidewalks crowded with men and women trudging to work. The students of Alabama State College walking or thumbing rides, taxicabs with people clustered in them. Some of our people rode mules, others went in horse-drawn buggies, but most of them were walking, some making a round trip of as much as 12 miles. Martin later wrote, "As I watched them, I knew that there was nothing more majestic than the determined courage of individuals willing to suffer and sacrifice for their freedom and dignity." Martin rushed off again at 9 o'clock that morning to attend the trial of Mrs. Parks. She was convicted of disobeying the city's segregation ordinance and fined $10 in costs. Her young attorney, Fred D. Gray, filed an appeal. It was one of the first clear-cut cases of a Negro being convicted of disobeying the segregation laws. Usually the charge was disorderly conduct or some such thing. The leaders of the movement called a meeting for 3 o'clock in the afternoon to organize the mass meeting to be held that night. Martin was a bit late, and as he entered the hall, people said to him, "Martin, we have elected you to be our president. Will you accept?" Fear was an invisible presence at the meeting, along with courage and hope. Proposals were voiced to make the organization, which leaders decided to call the Montgomery Improvement Association, or MIA, a sort of secret society, because if no names were mentioned, it would be safer for the leaders. E.D. Nixon opposed that idea. "We're acting like little boys," he said, "and somebody's name will be known, and if we're afraid, we might as well just fold up right now. The white folks are eventually going to find out anyway. We better decide now, are we going to be fearless men or scared little boys?" That settled the question. It was also decided that the protest would continue until certain demands were met. Ralph Abernathy was made chairman of the committee to draw up the demands. Martin came home at 6 o'clock. He said later he was nervous about telling me he had accepted the presidency of the protest movement, but he need not have worried, because I sincerely meant what I said when I told him that night, "You know, whatever you do, you have my backing." Reassured, Martin went into his study. He was to make the main speech at the mass meeting that night. It was now 6:30. This was the way it was usually to be. He had only 20 minutes to prepare what he thought might be the most decisive speech of his life. He said afterward that thinking about the responsibility and the reporters and the television cameras, he almost panicked. 5 minutes wasted and only 15 minutes left. At that moment, he turned to prayer. He asked God to restore my balance and to be with me in a time when I need your guidance more than ever. How could he make his speech both militant enough to rouse people to action and yet devoid of hate and resentment? He was determined to do both. Martin and Ralph went together to the meeting. When they got within 4 blocks of the Holt Street Baptist Church, there was an enormous traffic jam. 5,000 people stood outside the church listening to loudspeakers and singing hymns. Inside, it was so crowded, Martin told me, the people had to lift Ralph and him above the crowd to pass them from hand to hand over their heads to the platform. The crowd and the singing inspired Martin, and God answered his prayer. Later, Martin said, "That night I understood what the older preachers meant when they said, 'Open your mouth and God will speak for you.'" First, the people sang Onward Christian Soldiers in a tremendous wave of 5,000 voices. This was followed by a prayer and the reading of the scriptures. Martin was introduced, people applauded, television lights beat upon him. Without any notes at all, he began to speak. Once again, he told the story of Mrs. Parks and rehearsed some of the wrongs black people were suffering. Then he said, "But there comes a time when people get tired. We are here this evening to say to those who have mistreated us so long that we are tired. Tired of being segregated and humiliated. Tired of being kicked about by the brutal feet of oppression." The audience cheered wildly, and Martin said, "We have no alternative but to protest. We have been amazingly patient. But we come here tonight to be saved from that patience that makes us patient with anything less than freedom and justice." Taking up the challenging newspaper comparison with the White Citizens Council and the Klan, Martin said, "They are protesting for the perpetuation of injustice in the community. We are protesting for the birth of justice. Their methods lead to violence and lawlessness. But in our protest, there will be no cross burnings. No white person will be taken from his home by a hooded Negro mob and brutally murdered. We will be guided by the highest principles of law and order." Having roused the audience for militant action, Martin now set limits upon it. His study of nonviolence and his love of Christ informed his words. He said, "No one must be intimidated to keep them from riding the buses. Our method must be of persuasion, not coercion. We will only say to the people, 'Let your conscience be your guide.' Our actions must be guided by the deepest principles of the Christian faith. Once again, we must hear the words of Jesus. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you. If we fail to do this, our protest will end up as a meaningless drama on the stage of history, and its memory will be shrouded in the ugly garments of shame. We must not become bitter and end up hating our white brothers. As Booker T. Washington said, 'Let no man pull you so low as to make you hate him.'" Finally, Martin said, "If you will protest courageously, and yet with dignity and Christian love, future historians will say, 'There lived a great people, a black people, who injected new meaning and dignity into the veins of civilization.' This is our challenge and our overwhelming responsibility." As Martin finished speaking, the audience rose cheering in exultation. In that speech, my husband set the keynote and the tempo of the movement he was to lead from Montgomery onward.